either like emailing themselves jobs that they never apply for, or they are applying to a lot of jobs and not getting much traction either way, right? So I don't know which end of the spectrum you might be on, whether you're emailing yourself jobs, flagging jobs, or, meaning to apply, but then just sort of never getting into the swing of things, or relying on volume to help you get traction. So turning your job search a little bit into a numbers game. And maybe you are someone who signs up for a lot of webinars like this one, but you're not necessarily doing a lot of implementation. Like you're struggling to manage your time. You're not really sure how to operationalize, what you're hearing for yourself, or you're not sure if it applies. Or you're so overwhelmed that starting a job search feels impossible, right? So maybe you don't know exactly what to target. You're not feeling confident about your experience. Maybe you're in a really exhausting, overwhelming job right now that makes it very difficult to be optimistic and energized for something different. So if any of these are things that you're experiencing, I want you to know that these are really, really common challenges. These are things our clients are overcoming every day and certainly every week as they navigate their way through the process. And so while a lot of people feel like they've hit a brick wall when they're experiencing these things, what I think is going on is actually a very normal process. So I want to share with you we'll get started with the first step of our framework that helps people put themselves back in the driver's seat, get clear about what they want, and start communicating their value and doing so consistently. So the first place we always start is with self-reflection. This is a step that I see a lot of people skip, either because they're in a hurry or they don't really know how to do this well. Maybe they're just applying to a whole bunch of jobs with the same job title and just hoping for the best. But this is something that I think is really foundational, and it can help shape the success of your job search. It helps give boundaries to your job search. It helps you set expectations for your job search. It also helps us really start to understand what you are bringing to the table. So the ways that our clients do this includes going over reflection prompts and exercises that we have for them. We have conversations on coaching calls and group calls, but also something that's easily available to you is just doing some free writing and paying attention to, the journey that you've had, what you've learned, any sort of pivotal moments, that have shifted your interests or, sent your career in another way. This could be something like you gained a new skill and new opportunities seem possible, but it could also be something personal, like people who are diagnosed with chronic disease or decide to start a family or relocate to another part of the country, right? So we want to just start to understand for ourselves how it is that we've gotten here and what we've learned along the way. There's also a really good opportunity here to look for patterns and overlaps in our interests, some major themes that can help direct our attention. Something that I think is underrated is looking at active job postings, not to put in your apply or to not apply pile, but to really start looking at those qualifications, to really start thinking, what experiences do I have that match up with these? Am I largely qualified for these jobs? Which of these jobs feels like a stretch? There's so much to be gleaned, even when you are, a very junior person looking at roles that you feel slightly underqualified for. There's ways that you can learn as you document your experience, what you can put forward to partially meet those qualifications. You can also start playing around with job titles to find roles that require fewer years of experience, right? And so just taking some time to really be methodical in considering the roles that you're actually targeting and what they're asking for can be really helpful, because what I often find is the case is that the more specific we can be in demonstrating and communicating your qualifications, the easier it will be to get traction when you're applying, especially online. And I wrote down document because we really want to be writing all of this down. I'm sure I don't have to tell you that the emotional journey of a job seeker has a lot of ups and it has a lot of downs. And so instead of sort of just relying on the day that we're having to tell us where we are and what we know about ourselves, I think tracking all of this from the jobs you've applied to what you've learned can be really helpful and instructive. I, as you know, have a research background, so I always like to look at things in black and white. I like to look at the data. So even when I'm, feeling emotional or really, excited or whatever it may be, I like to be able to return back to the basics. without, so much of my emotions involved. So writing this down is not just a helpful reference point. It's also, when I used to teach college level sociology, and I would always assign research papers. And one of the reasons that we did this is because writing is a pedagogical strategy. It is a way that we learn. And in this case, it's a way that we're learning about ourselves. So we're kind of using this pedagogical strategy to help people really document what it is that they've been up to, what they've learned, what they're well qualified for. And that's really important work. I have some prompts here that I'd love to share with you. These are some of my favorites. And I always ask, I consider this like a minimum viable reflection process. So if you are someone who just kind of hit the ground running on your job search, these are some questions to ask yourself for sure. My favorite is, what are you most proud of? When I ask this question of clients, I often uncover things that are not on the resume. And to be honest, they may not even belong on the resume. They may be ways that they showed up in tough environments where they were honest and maintained their integrity. There may be specific projects that they were really proud of, but this is always a very worthwhile question to sit with and to think of an example or two, because there's a lot of content here for us to potentially use along the way. And then, of course, what do you want more of and what do you want less of? It's usually easy to come up with the what do you want less of. Like if you're showing up to a job right now and you're getting, you're interacting with certain kinds of people and you're getting assigned certain kinds of tasks, there's a good chance you have a good sense of what you don't want to do anymore or what you'd like to do less of. But people don't spend nearly as much time painting a picture of what it is that they do want. And this doesn't just have to be tied to, the description of your job. Maybe you want to be fully remote. Maybe you want more leadership, more strategy. Maybe you want to make a deeper change in the nature of your work. So these are some questions that I think are really important to sit with. And then I also really want the people that I work with, our clients, to think about what environment or cultural components do you need to do your best work? Do you need a manager who's really invested in your professional development? Or are you happy if someone just leaves you alone to do your job? Are you loving being part of a team, or are you looking to work independently? Do you need a lot of reinforcement, or are you someone who can work very autonomously? So I want you to really think, like, what kind of resources do you need? What kind of interactions and relationships are important to you? Because this is going to help set boundaries around your search. It'll help you evaluate opportunities so that you're not sort of just pursuing things aimlessly, but really making sure that you are aligning your interests and needs and goals and values with the opportunities as you're learning about them. And then finally, I always like to ask the question, like, what's changed for you in the last couple of years? There's been a lot. Like, we're job searching in challenging times, and those challenging times started, for most of us a few years ago, right? So there's been a lot of ups and downs. People's lives have changed in a lot of dramatic ways. So maybe there are things you literally need out of a job. I've seen people take a step back into, less demanding jobs. I've seen people really prioritize money because they want to buy a house and housing's expensive, right? So what are your needs now? Pay attention to that, because these things change and people can be kind of slow to acknowledge that that's what's going on. So the goal in the self-reflection phase is to be writing and documenting, generating self-knowledge and greater awareness of what we're bringing to the roles. If you could spend an hour here, your job search would be better for it. If you could spend a couple weeks, like, really thinking this through, you would be very solidly prepared for your next job search. This will make it so much easier to do all of the communicating that's required, right? As we go through this, whether it's in writing or it's in person or virtual, you're going to have to talk about yourself a lot. You're going to have to write about yourself, and having some draft content that's just for you, where you don't have to be positioning it for other audiences, is a really great way to get started. And it prepares us perfectly for the next step, which is around revision. And this really is, it's distinct from self-reflection, because self-reflection is for us, and revision means we're making changes and communicating strategically with the intention of other people being the audience here. So this includes things like resumes, cover letters, LinkedIn profiles, includes interviewing formally and also networking conversations, because ultimately your successful job search is about communication, being able to understand what other people are looking for and communicate how you can contribute to filling their gap or solving that problem. I'm going to just, for time's sake, talk about resumes primarily because they are such an effective tool for our clients. So let me just kind of walk you through what that has looked like for most of our clients. This is a good opportunity when you have a job posting that you want to target to really pay attention to the qualifications and what they're asking for here. And I see people do all kinds of things, like especially, I see a lot of my clients make up qualifications or make assumptions about qualifications or get really kind of stumped when the qualification says strong quantitative and qualitative skills, which, out of context can mean a lot of different things. But in context with job responsibilities, a job title, we can try to ascertain that better. So when I ask people who feel like they're not qualified for jobs, how are you qualified? How do you meet this qualification? We're able to convey so much more than nothing. So for example, one time I had a client who brought me a job that required a master's degree in either communications, law, or biology, like three very different degrees. And she was like, I don't have that. I don't have a master's degree in any of these things. Like, I'm not sure if I should apply or not. She actually had her MD. She was a medical doctor. She'd spent years working in labs, was working as a physician, and probably would have had what I considered sufficient for a master's degree in biology. She had an undergraduate in biology. She'd done all this lab experience and postdoctoral work. So that's what I mean. Like sometimes people will really take them too literally, and then sometimes people won't take them literally enough. So, you really want to be thinking, how am I qualified? If you are a data scientist, the expectation of what quantitative and qualitative skills means for you is probably different from that of a project manager, right? So if you're a project manager and they're asking for quantitative and qualitative skills, like you probably won't have to function as a data scientist, right? So I want you to kind of use the context to make sense of the qualifications if that's helpful. But I really want you to work on making the best possible case, right, for your candidacy and not assuming or taking yourself out of the running. I always say to my clients, I like for them to be qualified, that's part of our strategy for sure. But I think we all know there are stranger things than unqualified people getting roles. I'm sure we've all seen examples of that. So mostly what we want to be doing is creating opportunities for ourselves. And then the third component of this, and this is a little bit of a controversial take, as controversial as takes get in my world, which is that we're going to write our resume like a human being is going to read it. I have never once in my almost decade-long tenure of writing resumes and helping people with resumes ever written a resume with an applicant tracking system in mind. I am always thinking about the person that's reading the resume because that was the role that I was in, right? So I'm always thinking about the recruiter. I'm thinking about the hiring manager. And what I want to do, if I were thinking about just the applicant tracking system, I would be thinking about keywords or formatting. But when I think about the human reader, those things actually still matter, but they matter in a slightly different way. We want to be able to communicate clearly what your qualifications are. We want the font and the margins and, kind of the basics of the document to be highly readable because a lot of recruiters are seeing a lot of applicants hiring for multiple roles. So we basically want to make the recruiter's job easy. That's really what I'm thinking about when I'm writing a resume. So I pulled these qualifications off of like a fairly entry-level job, just so that everyone would have the same, I think everyone can understand a lot of what's in this role, right? And what I want you to just pay attention to here, and I know there's a lot here. That's actually part of what I want you to see. There's a lengthy list, like over a dozen bullet points, I think. There's some platforms and software and, skills required. We have some social media skills, like pretty pretty basic stuff that's required, but you can see that they're naming some platforms and software specifically. You can also see years of experience. You can see types of experience, right? Experience in marketing and communications, communications materials, print, web, digital, social media marketing, graphic design, layout, typography, right? And then you can also see things like energy, flexibility, initiative, attention to detail, global experience, solid organizational and time management. So you can see that there's a real mix here of some technical experience, some relational soft skill experience, some years of and domains of experience. And I want you to sort of start thinking about that when you're looking at this list of qualifications and really thinking, because even very, very technical roles will often have some kind of like relational component or behavioral component around time management or teamwork or something like that. And being responsive to these qualifications is one of the ways our clients get traction when they're applying online. So let me just show you my favorite way to do this. We write something called the summary of qualifications. This goes at the top of your resume, underneath your name and header, and above literally anything else, right? Because we read resumes from the top down, left to right. So what we put on the first page, and particularly at the top of the first page, really matters. Okay, it's very valuable real estate. So we want to be very responsive. And instead of using an objective statement, which is like a little bit dated and fundamentally not that helpful, and instead of using a personal summary, which is about you and may work for the jobs that you want, but may also be a little too generic, we want to take the time to write 3 to 5 bullet points that speak directly to how you meet the qualifications of the job. So you can see we called out specifically the years of experience in some of these areas of expertise that they were asking for. We've got the first couple of bullet points covering that. We've got some relational teamwork aspects here. And I named some of the software platforms and technical stuff that they were asking for as well. So you can see this is just a very concise way just to be very clear and respond back to them very explicitly, like you're looking for XYZ, here's how I meet XYZ. Now we don't copy and paste this. We want to use some original language and positioning here, but we do want to be very clear with the language. I don't get too creative here. I want to make sure that they're seeing what they're asking for. You can have up to 5 bullet points, but you want to make sure it doesn't turn into just a block of text, because again, like that's not super easy to read if it's just like several lines of text, they're all the same length. White space is your friend. Really nice bold bullet points are your friend, and being as clear and concise as possible is definitely helpful here. Now, I know there's a lot of folks here who probably have, more technical skill than LinkedIn and Microsoft Office. So let me just give you a couple of options for how you can address some of that. Most of my clients have a skills section underneath the summary of qualifications where they will list whatever they're using. So I would say this works well for people who are like project managers or, not necessarily people who are doing a lot of coding and building, but people who are doing a lot of project management, ideating, that sort of thing. And then an option that a lot of software folks use is listing languages, frameworks, databases, and infrastructure. And you can just list them here, right, in your resume. And then once you do that, like the reason I like to give those things a place to live on our resume is it's one less thing you actually have to tailor and customize. Like you can just give them a home on your resume so that people can find them easily when they're trying to assess your qualifications. Now, just a couple of other points on this. There's more than one way to do this well. If you don't have every single qualification, you should still do your best to address as many of the qualifications as possible. And I'll also just say that it takes our clients probably 3 to 5, applications to really feel like they can do this efficiently. I like to suggest that people keep track of the bullet points that they create in their job search so that this becomes less of a rewriting exercise where we're just kind of reinventing the wheel and more of an exercise where we're copying and pasting and making tweaks. So as you practice this and use this more, you will get better at it and it will happen faster. The other thing I just want to say is that you typically, for most of our clients, they don't need to be doing any other tailoring in their resume. So this is really where all of that customization happens. It positions their most relevant experience front and center so that the qualifications that they have are really the first thing the recruiter sees. And that's really what we want. Now, just to give you a sense of how this works, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in a few slides. Once we've done the initial resume work with our clients and they're working with optimized, revised templates and they know how to tailor it effectively, I want them to focus on 4 to 8 targeted, tailored applications a month for at least 2 months before we make any radical changes or decide that it's not working. Our clients do not use a high volume job search approach. And right now, even folks who are searching in tech, where I think the job market feels the hardest, are not using a high volume approach. The 4 to 8 targeted, tailored applications a month. So jobs you actually want, jobs you actually tailored your resume for, right? That is helping people yield really high quality interviews, quite honestly, at big tech, at other tech companies, at well-established tech companies. So if you are throwing applications all over the place, if your job search looks like a numbers game, I really want to invite you to change your approach or experiment with your approach. Sometimes people get nervous at the idea of applying to fewer jobs, especially if they're applying to, 8 to 10 jobs, every couple of days, and they're not hearing back. The idea of applying to less is really scary. So if that's you, what I would say in this case is to do 4 to 8 targeted, tailored applications, and then do whatever you want after that. Like apply at scale if you want to, but make sure you're hitting, those numbers for 2 months. The other thing that 2 months does is it gives us enough of a timeline. People make a lot of knee-jerk changes. They look at their inbox and their cell phone as soon as they hit submit on an application. And really what I want people focusing on is doing what they need to do to generate opportunities, which means creating those opportunities for yourself. All kinds of things happen in the hiring process, especially in whatever sort of pseudo recession-like environment we have right now. Jobs get put on hold. People who are hiring for them have been laid off, even if those jobs are still active. It's summer, people are on vacation, right? So there's all kinds of reasons the hiring process can move slow, and job seekers tend to be pretty quick to assume that something they're doing isn't working. So for at least the first 8 weeks of your job search, I really want you to be focused on putting out targeted, tailored applications and let time also do its job. I tell my clients, you will never job search faster than the hiring process. And while tech has always had a reputation of a fairly efficient, at least compared to academia, where I originally came from, it can still take a long time. There's a lot of things going on, a lot of organizational shifts and changes. So I simply don't assume that things will move quickly. Focus on what you need to do to move your applications forward. All right, so I want to talk now about the next step, which is imperfect action. So I'm going to repeat a little bit of what I just shared, but this is about building that consistency in to your job search. A lot of times when people come to me and they're like, my job search isn't working, it's because the right inputs aren't there. I hardly ever see anyone applying for jobs that they're really well qualified for and not getting traction when their resume is really optimized and their applications are consistent. Usually when there's a gap, they're not, they're not getting enough interviews. It's because they're not applying for enough jobs, or they're not applying for jobs consistently, or their resume is not working. There's usually something we can pinpoint here. And there's a ton of ups and downs in this process, right? So I want to acknowledge that there are good days and bad days. So I just want to share some of the things that we walk our clients through and deal with pretty regularly. A lot of times there's all kinds of fears that hold people back. And probably the most common one is, what if my next job is worse than the one I have now? So if you're in a really toxic job, you feel undervalued, unseen, unappreciated, it's really hard to move through this process. If you are someone with a significant gap, or if you have a transition story that you've really struggle with. It's really important, I think, to air these out. That's really what the self-reflection place is for. And you can always revisit it. Like, it doesn't have to be a one and done situation. But I think it can be really helpful to talk these through with a friend or a coach. I think it can be really helpful to just say, like, what's holding me back? Like, oh yeah, I don't have any faith that my next job is worse than this one. And so how do we kind of help people conquer that? Sometimes we sit and let them share what they're afraid of. But oftentimes it looks like hearing from peers who have navigated through the same fear and ended up in a place where they were quite happy. Sometimes people need to take a break from the job search process. So if you are sort of letting fear drive your job search, you're not alone, and your job search isn't doomed. Give yourself some space to really think through and acknowledge what's here. And then, again, as the researcher, I like to say, how can we turn these into a research question? Like, what kind of evidence do we need to look for to know that like the jobs you're considering are a better fit for you than the one you have now? What are your red flags? What are your yellow flags? What are your green flags? And if you're worried that no one understands your story, it's time to start practicing the story. It might be time to shorten it, to distill it, to reposition it, to get comfortable with it yourself. That's often the hardest part for a lot of people. So there's all kinds of practical things that we can do here, right? So learning to be an active participant in your search and not just someone waiting to get picked. I think that's so important. That's really how we end up in jobs that are aligned and not just ending up anywhere, right? Practicing and experimenting with storytelling, recording yourself, being on a Zoom with yourself, or using photo booth and just hearing yourself talk is truly, I'm not going to lie, one of the most painful things, but it can really, really be helpful in terms of refining how you want to storytell and show up in these conversations. And the other thing is, for better or worse, I really see the job search process, even all the opportunities that don't pan out, as still an opportunity to build skills and build connections. One of my, big professional breaks came because I was a finalist for a role. I didn't get it, but I had such a good rapport with everyone. They were very kind to me, and she was like, I want to keep in touch, and if there's anything else here, I'll definitely put you forward. And about 9 months later, her colleague was hiring for the exact same role, and she sent me directly to him, and that's how I got my first big pay bump. So really, it can be very demoralizing and stressful to not get traction, but I try to really encourage our clients to take the long view. Speaking of taking care of yourself, let's talk a little bit about that in the job search process. A lot of people think that they can put their whole life on hold to job search, to, vacation can wait, fun things can wait. But I really think your job search is best served by you taking extremely good care of yourself and those that you're responsible for. And in the last few years, we've seen people really prioritize on having a very strategic resume, a strategic LinkedIn, and not turning their job search into a 24/7 endeavor. And that has left a time for them to have a personal life, time for them to have their family, time for them to do like really important community work during this period. So I really want to encourage you, if you are spending a lot of time thinking about your job search, dreading your job search, stressing about your job search, your time is probably better spent getting really focused on developing a resume that's going to work with you, and also not job searching, right? Like really doing what you need to do, doing it extraordinarily well, and allowing time to do its job. All right, a little bit about connection and relationships. I think about this aspect of the job search a lot. Yes, I'm talking about networking, but I'm also just talking about the social, emotional, and relational aspects of the job search process and the role of relationships in your career overall. So if you are someone who's really struggling to do the sort of outreach or ask for the conversation or ask for the introduction, I want you to keep in mind that it could be helpful to sort of scaffold what it is that you're asking for. You don't always have to ask for a job. Sometimes what you're asking for is information. I actually think that's the best thing to ask for. People are usually willing to share their perspectives. They're willing to share their personal experiences. But sometimes asking for an introduction or asking, can you put my resume in front of someone? If you have an established relationship, that might be a very reasonable ask, but it's also okay to make other asks. And getting information, having a conversation, establishing contact and relationships can be so helpful. And this is something that can pay off in the short term and in the long term. So if you don't have a place where you are cultivating intentional professional relationships, I hope that you find one, because it can be very supportive, very encouraging, and it can create opportunities even when you aren't looking down the line. So I always tell my clients, if you want your next job to be easier, this is the kind of work you should be doing when you're not looking for a job. And the best piece of advice I can offer around meeting people who share your interests and values, just, probably being here is a very good example of that. But I really encourage folks to find opportunities to meet people where they have shared interests. Not necessarily the biggest possible networking event, but where there's like, you have, either a shared geographic area or, affinity groups or alumni groups. I think having something in common can not only ensure that there's people in the room that you'll feel good talking to, I think it just kind of creates sort of a more instant bond and connection that can be very, very helpful if you're trying to sort of establish yourself, as a professional. So once we've gone through this process, or any of these processes, I should say, when we come all the way back around, I think about this framework as like a circle, because the job search isn't linear, right? It's very cyclical. And we come back. When we start at reflection, we go to revision, right? We're actually doing the work of our job search, and we come all the way back around to self-reflection. But this time we have experience, we have data, we've been doing things that we can reflect on more strategically and intentionally. So I think of this as assessment, which is basically self-reflection plus work equals time for assessment. And, it's anticipating how long someone's job search is going to take. It has never been fun. It's never been easy. But I can tell you that 6 to 9 months is pretty typical. And I can also tell you lots happen in less time and some happen in more time. But that 6 to 9 months is usually like a really good kind of estimate. Like if I was giving myself an initial runway, that's how much time I would give myself. But this is just a reminder. It's easy to kind of look around. It's easy to get on LinkedIn and see other people, getting jobs. You may need more time than someone else's. I see people who are pivoting from self-employment into full-time employment, who are coming back from a gap of some kind. Maybe you've taken a break or sabbatical. Sometimes that can take a little bit longer. Or if there's a ton of competition, I have a couple clients right now who are like only considering, very competitive roles and very competitive industries. It might take longer than somebody else's, and that's okay. It doesn't mean you're failing. It doesn't mean you won't be successful. Your job search may also need to be put on the back burner. You may get sick. Your kids may get sick. You may just need a break. Whatever it might be, I always like to tell people, if you can, give yourself permission to intentionally disengage and then intentionally re-engage, right? Like put it back on your schedule. It's very normal that this is, because it goes on for quite some time for most people, that it's something you need to give yourself permission to put down and pick up, and, so you can balance the other things going on in your life. There may also be times where you really need to be spending more time, or you're inspired to spend a lot more time. So if you're going through multiple interviews at once, I think that can be super demanding. And I don't think it makes a ton of sense to try and keep up with the 4 to 8 applications if you're in multiple interviews. And I will say, when clients start with us, I always say our process is front loaded. We start with revising those assets. And then from there, like once that happens, I think you're spending a lot less time. So it's okay to have periods of intensity, but there also needs to be periods of not that. So keep that in mind. And rest is like not an option. So taking good care of yourself, getting sleep, getting outside, really tending to the basics will help sustain your search. It will help you make better decisions for yourself. And I think it will result in a better quality output from you as well. So if you are not tracking the jobs, and there's lots of cool trackers, but honestly, just like a simple spreadsheet will work just fine. I really encourage tracking which jobs you consider, which ones you end up applying for, when and if you hear, keeping track of the applications you've used. When clients or new clients do that, it really helps me figure out pretty quickly like where we need to start. So from an assessment perspective, I think it's tremendously helpful to have that data, because again, we really can't trust our brains on a day-to-day basis in this process. There's just too many ups and downs. Your job search might also benefit from a strategy. So if you have not done self-reflection work, if you don't have red flags, if you are applying all over the place, that could be a problem. It sounds like it makes you very flexible, but it could mean that you are not aligning yourself as best as you could with some of the opportunities that you're best for. So sometimes people will be like, I just need a job as quickly as possible. I'm going to apply all over the place. If I needed a job as quickly as possible, that would not be my approach. I would take a good hard look at what was open. I would take a good hard look at my actual experience and qualifications and figure out where I would be most likely to get traction first. So if you have skipped on the strategy, please consider revisiting that. I think it can make a really big difference. You might also need a break. So sometimes, you know, I'll hear from someone who will be burned out at work, burned out, you know, on the verge of taking a medical leave or having already taken a medical leave. And really the first thing we need to do in that case is like, make sure you have some boundaries and expectations around work and what this can actually look like. You cannot burn the candle at all ends. And so taking a break may be the first step you need in order to kind of produce a high quality job search that results in a job that's really aligned. And then last, but certainly not least, you know, I tend to focus a lot on strategy and tactics and how-tos. But something I know from working with clients, I work with clients privately, we also have a job search community, is that the emotional support is so key. Again, that's partly what helps you sustain your search. And so when I started our job search community, like 4 years ago, I held office hours and I was like, I'm going to answer people's questions. I'm going to share my knowledge with the group, which is, you know, partly what happens there. But I think what really happens there is that actually people get to chat with each other. They get to share information and perspective and ideas and troubleshoot and share what they've learned from their own experience. And it's just so energy affirming. So a lot of people have told me that they come to those calls even when they don't have questions because they're re-energizing. So if you don't have support for your job search, like think about who in your circle, you know, do you have other friends who are job searching? You know, what resources can you access? Because part of it is about having really great assets, and part of the job search is about using those assets consistently. Much easier to sort of fix a resume than it is to use it to apply to 4 to 8 targeted tailored applications a month. That's a whole other project, right? We're doing it for 2 months. So you need support to implement. So think about what the options are for you there. Okay, so we're winding down and I'll be looking forward to spending the last few minutes to take some questions. But I searched one time in, you know, a stock image site, and I was like, job search or people looking for a new job. And these are the images that came up. And I thought it was just, I thought they were ridiculous to use, but my clients at the time, I had shared these with some of them and they were like, no, this is exactly what it's like. It's like wandering in a desert. It's like staying up late on your computer. It's being lost, you know, in the jungle, that it really can be such an overwhelmingly challenging experience. And there's going to be a lot of challenging moments. But what I also want to remind you of is that you could be in a different place much more quickly than you think. Things can change on a dime. When you start changing what you're doing, things start changing in terms of how they're happening for you. So if you are not someone taking full advantage of your resume, if you're not taking advantage of the relationships and folks in your corner, there's probably a lot of opportunities here for you to maximize. So hopefully I've given you some ideas on how to do that. I would love to just take questions from folks. If anyone has any questions or thoughts or wants me to go over anything, I'll pause and see if anyone wants to chat.
Thank you, Jen, for the talk. And like she said, if anyone has any questions, please do so. I do have a question. I do. So what happens to, so my background is computational biology, but it's interesting because like some jobs can say PhD required, some say PhD and master's, several years of experience required. But then you have the same job title, different companies, but then one has a PhD required, one doesn't have a PhD required. But then the skill sets are similar to what you may have. So what do you do then? Do you not apply?
That's a great question. How many, do you have a master's degree?
Yes, I do.
And do you have, and you don't have a PhD?
Yeah, so I do have a master's and like 7 years of experience out of the master's. So like there are jobs that would say PhD with a master's, like say 3 to 5 years, or PhD or master 3 to 5 years. Then some will say PhD required, and then five years of experience or something like that. So for me, it's kind of like tricky to be like, okay, I'm not gonna apply for this because maybe it has a PhD, but then you see the same job in two different companies.
Yeah, so that I agree that that's a tricky space to navigate. And some things I'm thinking about, because I don't have a solid definitive answer for you, is, if there is a recruiter hiring for a role like that, they may just be looking for the PhD if the PhD is actually part of the qualifications. Like it's not, I think academics are, when academics are doing the hiring, I think there's all kinds of things about the approach that can shift a little bit. But when non-PhDs are doing the hiring, I think they treat it like the rest of the world, the rest of the non-academic world. So for sure, I wouldn't skip out on the opportunities that are not requiring a master's degree. And I would probably go ahead and apply for some of those jobs that require a PhD, and try to leverage, the graduate degree you do have and the years of experience you do have, because that may be, I mean, 7 years is I don't want to say it's equivalent to a PhD, right? But in terms of years, it's not too far off. The other thing that I think could be very worthwhile in this case would be to do some connecting and relationship building with the actual hiring managers, because I think there's a lot of, especially hiring managers with an academic background, who would probably be thrilled to bring someone like you onto the team without a PhD. But sometimes those job postings default to some standardized degrees and requirements. So if you haven't tried establishing relationships inside, some of those organizations on some of those teams, I would definitely do that, because what I've seen is that can lead to whole different jobs being posted with someone in mind, and you could be that someone in mind.
I think we have several questions. One is Megan. If you're more of a junior candidate and job postings for a company you're really interested in indicate more years of experience, how can you most effectively express interest in working for the company and get considered for a more junior role?
That's a good question. So I think especially the way the market looks right now, there are a few things I'm assuming. One, I'm assuming there's a lot of applicants for almost every role. And two, I'm assuming there's a lot of qualified applicants for almost every role. And so when my clients are applying to jobs that they're underqualified for, not necessarily unqualified, right? Like it's not like they don't meet any of the qualifications, but underqualified. Shoot your shot by all means. Like I said, stranger things have happened, but I wouldn't want someone who is actively job searching with any degree of urgency to sort of over index on jobs that might be more of a reach. So I don't know that there's a great application strategy, because they're going to have probably plenty of qualified applicants to choose from. So I would look for jobs where I was well qualified, but then I would also take the approach I just suggested to Jordana, which is like, if you can establish relationships there, like if you can figure out who the hiring manager is, if you can have those conversations, then I think there's an opportunity for a different kind of job potentially to be created. So what I've actually suggested to some clients is that they look for jobs when they're trying to get into a specific organization, maybe look for jobs where you are overqualified, but overqualified and ideally not losing a ton of pay. Like some of my clients are in a position where like if they took a lateral move somewhere else, they would make more money, right? So that could be a really effective way to get your to kind of get your foot in the door of a new organization. I know there are people who are like, doesn't matter if you're not qualified, you'll be bored if you're qualified, but it's literally an equal opportunity hiring process. Like it would be in violation of of our compliance policies to put unqualified candidates into the pile. We would actually need to repost the job if we didn't have enough qualified candidates. We'd need to change the qualifications. So keep an eye on it, because that could happen. But the market is so tight right now. I'm assuming that there's a lot of applicants and that a lot of them are qualified.
And then Katie has a question. So she
Yeah.
says, "This is an awesome presentation. Thank you. How important is it to submit an application via a referral, or does it matter?"
If you have the referral, great, amazing. Please don't not use it. I think for most of our clients, when they're doing the 4 to 8 applications over the course of 2 months, I would say like 90 to 95% of our clients are getting interviews. So I totally think your application can get you traction cold, but we never know who else is in the applicant pool and which of them have referrals as well. So if you have it, if you have the opportunity to use referrals, please do. And if not, and you're still can make a great case for your candidacy, then go ahead and apply. I think it's well worth it.
And then Lashin has a question. Hey Jenna, thank you for this session. I appreciate all your help and support. Tomorrow is my last day in a company, and my current manager has asked me to move a level up and look for jobs like program manager. I do not have any certifications. Can I leverage experience for lack of certifications?
Yes, often the answer is yes. In fact, often there's a few exceptions, like PMPs are pretty standard qualifications on a lot of project manager roles, but I think certifications for program managers tend to be less consistent. So I would absolutely leverage your experience. A lot of times people worry about certifications, but I always say, show me the job postings, show me the qualifications, because some will require that or prefer that, and some won't, especially with a program manager. So yes, use your experience and pay attention to those aspects of the qualifications that you have experience meeting 100%. Good luck.
And then Ken says, "Thanks for the presentation. I think I might be having the opposite problem. I went into my PhD program straight from undergrad and have little experience outside of academia. I'm hoping to go into tech after the PhD and would like to get internships on my resume. Oftentimes, if I want positions that could only require a bachelor's, how can I make it seem that I'm not overqualified and actually interested in the role?"
Yes. Okay. So what would I do here? So I'm curious if this person is struggling to actually get traction applying and they fear that it's because they're overqualified, or if that's just a fear that they haven't tested yet necessarily. If you haven't completed your PhD, you could just list your master's degree if you acquired one, or you could just list the bachelor's degree that you have. I don't love stripping people's education and qualifications away, but it might be just the simplest way, especially if recruiters are looking at you and they don't understand the academic experience and what that pivot and transition would look like. So you could just simplify with the degrees you've actually earned. That said, your current experience probably is like research assistant, right? Or PhD researcher. So I think you could leverage the research experience and not overemphasize the degree. I would do a summary of qualifications. Always, when you're going from academic to anything else, definitely use the summary of qualifications so that you can pull out the pieces of your experience that you do have. And I would also write a cover letter explaining, adding just a little bit of context about your interest in the program.
Do you have, oh yes, there's one more. So this is from Shia. I've had that women often apply when they need all most stated requirements for a position, whereas men are more likely to apply when they need a small percentage of requirements. When you mention being qualified for a position, what portion of requirements would be considered qualified?
This is a really good question, and everything here is true. Like, it is true that women withhold applying, and it's true that men have the opposite problem, in my experience working with clients. So when I talk about being qualified in this environment, I sometimes mean 100%. But what I actually see women doing is undervaluing their qualifications, like dismissing the qualifications they do have, and not communicating the qualifications they do have. So we always end up in this conversation about, should you be qualified or should you shoot your shot? But the problem I actually see is that people have the experience and don't communicate it effectively. So you really want to use the summary of qualifications to address what they're looking for, as plainly and clearly as you can. I think for someone to be really underqualified, I would probably say like 1, maybe 2 bullet points. I guess it depends how many qualifications there are. You know, if there's only a couple, then those are probably really important. I also, this is more of an art than a science, but the qualifications that are at the top of the list, the years of experience, you know, whatever the top skills are, maybe a degree or certification, those tend to be the least negotiable in my experience. So whenever I'm trying to figure out if I, you know, am running out of space, I want to be sure that I'm addressing those primarily and promptly, in the order in which they appear. So I guess I just want to help people think about this a little bit differently. Like, I do think you should be well qualified, literally, as and have as many of those bullet points as possible. Because in such a tight market, I'm worried that you will have trouble getting traction. But I also want to make sure you're giving yourself credit for the qualifications and not assuming that you're unqualified or underqualified, because people have a really hard time understanding what makes them qualified for a role. I hope that makes sense.
Are there any other questions? Oh, also, I have one last question.
Yeah.
So how important cover letters actually to the whole job application process?
I mean, honestly, I think when I think of writing cover letters, when it's required, it's important. And I also think it can be helpful for people making some kind of change or transition. I think it can be helpful for people when the role requires some kind of communication or leadership abilities. You know, I have clients who are like cloud engineers who do not write cover letters. So I think you have to kind of know your field and what kind of, you know, transition you're making. But I always do think when we do write cover letters, they're really more for the hiring manager than the recruiter. I think most recruiters will look at your resume and be very good at assessing based on what you've told them if you're qualified or not. And hiring managers, they won't see as many applicants as the recruiter does, so they can go a little bit deeper and are sometimes a little bit more curious, especially because you'll be working with them every day. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Do we have any other questions, ladies?
I will just say, if I can shortly, between now and the time I go on vacation in August, I have some one-off sessions available at a discount. So if you want to DM me on LinkedIn, if that's of interest to you, I'm happy to send a discount code and link for that. Their sessions aren't available on my website. So feel free to send me a DM if you're curious about that. But thank you everyone for joining me tonight and listening to me talk at great length about the job search process. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I think the ladies are all saying thank you in the chat.
Oh, I'm so glad. It's so nice to see. Thanks for being here.
Thank you all. I think we can wrap.